Chronological order of episodes is almost always a mystery to fans of various shows, and My Little Pony is no exception. Details tend to not match up if the episode release order is considered its chronological order, such as winter wrap-up happening despite episodes with no snow or winter prior to it, or Suited for Success happening a long time after the Ticketmaster, even though you'd expect Rarity to start making gala dresses instantly. Many people have tried arranging the episodes into what they perceive as a chronological order, mostly basing it on character development or references to past episodes. But we here at Cutie Mark Laboratories are going to figure out the order once and for all by examining and dissecting every single episode. Let's get started. Now, for this particular episode, we're only going to tackle the first season, as no episodes in future seasons happen before any here. I stumbled across an image on DeviantArt by The Last Gherkin, which I totally pronounced wrong, I'm willing to bet, which makes a rather good case for what they believe to be the chronological order. First off, Mare and the Moon and Elements of Harmony. Twilight goes to Ponyville, Lemur Moon is defeated, I really shouldn't have to say anything here. Next up, Gherkin places 3 episodes happening around the same time: Look Before You Sleep, Ghostbusters, and Griffin the Brush-Off. He chooses these based solely on character interactions and development, which is good and all, but we want more specific answers. So with that, I say the next episode is Griffin the Brush-Off. Twilight spends most of this episode either reading or just being out buying things, implying she's not yet used to hanging out with friends. And this is obviously early on in the friendship between Pinkie Pie and Rainbow Dash, due to the latter finding the former annoying for a while. Plus, it's mentioned at the start that Pinkie has seen Rainbow doing some crazy tricks. This will come into play later, trust me. The next episode is, actually, Bridal Gossip. First off, the episode revolves around Sakura, who visits every month, yet Twilight has not seen or heard of her. It must have been a short time since she arrived then, since if she arrived shortly after Sakura's last visit, the ponies would still be talking about her, so it must have been at least 2 weeks since Sakura's last visit before she arrived. That means she's been in town for about 2 weeks, which seems reasonable. Plus, the opening lines mention it being a gorgeous day in Ponyville, attributed to Rainbow Dash getting up early that day. Just like before, this will come into play later, trust me. Up next should be Ghostbusters, but there's one detail that puts this into question, and that's that Spike knows Snips and Snails by name. It's been, at most, 3 weeks since arriving in Ponyville, and with the way Twilight relies on Spike, it's hard to believe he'd get out very often. However, since no other episodes fit in here, we're just going to assume he met them off screen at some point or they're from Canterlot. In this episode, Twilight is unsure about using her magic in front of her friends, let alone the whole town, but she has to use it to fend off the Ursa Minor. Also, Rainbow Dash pulls off a clearly rehearsed flying routine. Once again, this will come into play later, trust me. This brings us to the next episode, Applebuck Season. While many would place this episode near the end of summer, I place it near the middle for reasons I'll get to later. And, a lot of people want to say it happens after Ticketmaster because of Big Macintosh and a girdle hurting his back and all, but that's only one piece of evidence. I have 3 pieces that point to Applebuck Season coming before Ticketmaster. 1. At the start of Ticketmaster, Twilight is helping Applejack with the apples, while Applebuck Season revolves around Applejack finally learning to accept help. 2. Twilight asked about Applejack's relatives in Applebuck Season, meaning she didn't know that they didn't actually live on the farm. But while helping Applejack in the start of Ticketmaster, you'd think she'd notice the lack of 11 ponies running around helping out, meaning she must know by that time. 3. Notice all the food Applejack tries to bribe Twilight with in Ticketmaster. Since we see the inside of her house a few times, and there doesn't seem to be any massive storage space to hold it all, aside from actual apples in her cellar, she must have spent all day cooking it up, meaning she'd need a lot of apples. Where could she get enough apples to make a hospital stand up and run away? Maybe from Applebuck Season. Also, Rainbow Dash asks Applejack for help with the trick, you get the drill by now. Except now, it is later, and we come to Sonic Rainboom, which has been placed here for several reasons. 1. Rainbow Dash still treats Fluttershy kind of badly, so Dragonshy hasn't happened yet. 2. Notice how I've been pointing Rainbow Dash out somehow in every episode since the pilot? That's because she's been practicing for the Best Young Flyer competition. Those crazy tricks Pinkie saw? Practice. Why'd she clear the clouds early? Planning to use the day to practice. Clearly rehearsed flying routine? Something she was going to use in her act. That help with a trick? Again, practice. 3. The girls clearly know Twilight knows a lot of magic, so this is after Ghostbusters, but it's still somewhat early as they don't know exactly what she can do. And 4. I recall reading somewhere that, in the novelization of this episode, it says Twilight and her new friends. Sure, this is the 7th episode chronologically with what I'm saying, 6 if the pilot is counted as one episode, but it still could happen within 2 months. Next up is Look Before You Sleep. Applejack and Rarity's fighting is what spurs most of the episode's conflict, but what puts this episode in its spot is the beginning. Applejack points out how it hasn't rained in a while because of the weather Pegasi not making it rain, so they need a major downpour to make up for it. Because, that's how it works. Later episodes, even after this season, show that Rainbow Dash is, if not the captain of Ponyville's weather Pegasi, at the very least their motivator. Since she's been busy practicing for the Best Young Flyer competition, it's possible that she's been slacking off, thus causing the other ponies to slack off as well. Plus, notice that there's been no rain in any of the episodes I've talked about up until now. And of course, the character development between Applejack and Rarity means this has to be a moderately early episode at the very least. Going back a bit, the rain also explains why Applebuck season was earlier on. With no rain, the plants were starting to dry up, so the Apple family must have bumped their Applebuck season up a couple weeks so they could get the apples before they died. This would also explain the sort of rivalry between Applejack and Rainbow Dash later on. The former is annoyed at the latter for slacking off and endangering her crops. The episode that comes next is Dragonshy, but honestly, not for any special reason. It's just a good place to put it because it allows Fluttershy to earn some assertiveness and also become less of a burden in the eyes of the others, making way for the placement of future episodes. Plus, it's just late enough that Twilight would know the skills of her friends by now and assign them proper jobs in dealing with the dragon. Finally, we come to Ticketmaster next. It's important that it comes after the previous two because it has rain in it that would contradict Look Before You Sleep if it came first. Plus, during the argument between the main 6 minus Twilight over the ticket, Fluttershy actually gets involved with the arguing, something she wouldn't have done before learning confidence in Dragonshy. Feeling Pinky Keen is the next to come up. Why? Because this is where Twilight finds out that she just shouldn't try to question Pinkie Pie, so her ignoring things Pinkie does in later episodes is explained. Not much else aside from the reference to Dragonshy meaning this has to happen afterwards. After this is Over a Barrel, because now they're approaching when the actual Applebuck season time would be, hence why the apple trees in Appaloosa have all their apples on them. This means that the transition from summer to autumn has begun. Next up, we have 2 episodes that actually happen at pretty much the same time, Call of the Cutie and Green Isn't Your Color. These both happen during the beginning of autumn as implied by 2 things. Call of the Cutie mostly focuses on Apple Bloom in school, likely in the early days because this is when she first starts being taunted about being a blankflake and shows the forming of the Cutie Mark Crusaders. Green Isn't Your Color is likely around the same time, as in addition to Fluttershy not appearing during Call of the Cutie, the fact that Photo Finish wants to see Fluttershy in some kind of nature-themed dress would point to the theme at the time being, well, nature, which usually happens during spring or early autumn. Next up is Suited for Success, where Rarity's rise to fame begins. There isn't a lot of the actual episode to place it here, but rather in its surrounding episodes. Swarm of the Century seems like it'd be the next episode, if only because you see the gala dresses in it somehow surviving the Parasprite attack. Also, at the end, because the town is basically destroyed by the Parasprites, a lot of time is needed between now and the next few episodes for repairs. And what's the next episode? A Dog and Pony Show, where Rarity's fame has reached the level where Sapphire Shores herself wants to hire her. And since this episode takes place primarily outside of Ponyville, reconstruction on the town can still be going on, but it's still past the point where Rarity's boutique is fixed up. I'd say this is about a month or 2 after the previous episode's events, so we're right in the middle of autumn now. Soon after it would be Stairmaster. No real reason why, it just seems to fit well. Next up is A Bird in the Hoof. Now that Ponyville is fixed, Celestia is making another appearance, and every pony is nervous because of how things went wrong before with the Parasprites. Again, it doesn't need to necessarily be here, but it fits well, and since Rarity wears her gala dress, it needs to be after Suited for Success. Owl's Well That Ends Well is next because the next episode demands it, and the next episode is Fall Weather Friends. This obviously has to happen in late autumn, but what makes it important is how it demands the placement of the previous episode. Pinkie Pie lets Spike commentate the running of the leaves with her, and in the previous episode, Spike tried to run away from home because the attention he normally got was being taken away. Pinkie would remember that and, seeing Spike get upset again, give him some attention by letting him do the commentating with her. Winter Wrap-Up is next, with a huge time gap between it and Fall Weather Friends. Since it takes place at the end of winter and no other episodes take place during winter, there's about 3 to 4 months between it and Fall Weather Friends. This is important regarding the next episode, which is Cutie Mark Chronicles. The Cutie Mark Crusaders' last appearance together was Stairmaster, and there had to have been a lot of time since then, since they're left to do whatever they want and roam town freely, while in Stairmaster they had to be supervised, meaning they're considered to have matured. There are other comparisons to other episodes that make it need to be after them, but since all of those happened before Stairmaster, there's not much of a point. The Grand Galloping Gala is next. That's right, the season finale is not the final episode of the season chronologically. To go back and quote Gherkin's chart, the Grand Galloping Gala likely takes place during the spring, as for that night only, all the flowers in the garden will bloom simultaneously. He also points out reasons why this episode has to happen after any other appearance of the gala dresses, Sonic Rainboom and A Bird in the Hoof, but because it already has to happen in spring and therefore after winter wrap-up, it already has its place solidified. Though technically it could come before Cutie Mark Chronicles, but there's no real evidence on that end, so I'd say these two are interchangeable. Party of One is up next, thanks to information Gherkin's chart pointed out, so I didn't have to go through the episode. Spike mentions it being spring when Piggy interrogates him, and Rarity mentions a Spring Has Sprung party happening previously. However, Gherkin lists this episode as happening before the Grand Galloping Gala, but evidence suggests it happens afterward. Say what you will about Pinkie Pie fans, but she is not that party crazy. She throws a party when some pony new comes to town, or when there's a genuine reason for one, like a birthday or something really good happening. It's just her inviting every pony in town rather than a select few that makes her seem party crazy. Yet she seems intent on throwing a party a day here, likely because of how her expectations of the gala were trampled and made her want to make up for that with loads of actual parties. Which brings us to the Showstoppers, the final episode of Season 1 chronologically. Talent shows tend to happen in schools near the end of the school year, so this episode will be around early summer or late spring. Since Twilight appears in the episode, it can't just be something that happened before she arrived, especially since the Cutie Mark Crusaders themselves didn't form until after she arrived, so it must be a year later instead, thus making it happen here and now as the final episode of the Season 1 timeline. And that is Season 1 put in proper chronological order. The Doctor would be proud. But what about Seasons 2 through 4? And where exactly do the Equestria Girls movies fit in? Well, that's an episode for another time. Line.